When I was 17, shortly after I graduated from high school, I stood on this cliff above Lake Superior, 300 feet below, the waves crashing against the rocks. I paused for a second, contemplating what I was about to do, and I stepped off the cliff. Luckily, right before I stepped off the cliff, I checked my harness. I made sure that my partner was on belay, and away I went. I had been given a 21-day wilderness experience through Minnesota Outward Bound as a graduation present from high school. I'd grown up fairly privileged, white, middle class, had a cabin to go to in the summer, never lacked for a meal. My dad was the majority leader of the Minnesota State Senate. I went through private Catholic schools. I had a lot of things that help people be successful. I had some challenges. My parents divorced when I was 13 years old. We moved about 2 miles away, which might as well have been 1,000 miles away. My schools, quite frankly, weren't all that great academically. And even though I had connected with a few teachers along the way, I wasn't leaving high school prepared to succeed in life. In today's terms, I didn't have the social emotional skills that I needed to be successful. A year after I was in Outward Bound, my dad gave me another gift. A week before I was supposed to go to Glacier National Park and work for the summer, my dad called us into a hospital room and told us that he had 6 months left to live. But before we could even shed a tear, he looked at me and said, "You're still going to Glacier National Park." He must have understood, although maybe in a way that he couldn't even have imagined, how important that experience was going to be for me that summer. Far away from any classroom, far away from any formal learning setting, I was enriched in ways that I could hardly imagine. And coupled with the summer experience the year before at Outward Bound, my life was profoundly changed, and my belief in my own abilities was enhanced significantly. I doubt that but for those two experiences, those 2 summers, I would be standing here talking to you as the mayor of the city of St. Paul. We have incredible, incredible stresses in our communities. Our children face obstacles that we can hardly even imagine. Hunger and homelessness and violence and drugs and all kinds of challenges that our kids are facing. And we can point our fingers at teachers all day long and say, "Why aren't you doing a better job with these children?" But I believe that we need to point our fingers in the mirror and ask ourselves, what are we going to do to help make sure that these children are successful? We need to ask ourselves as mayors and local elected officials, what can we do to bring support to our classrooms? But as mayors, we need to think outside the classroom to really understand what our role is in education. I reject the notion that you often hear, and I've used this phrase myself, mayors don't control education. But the Mott Foundation reminds us that education is something that happens all day, every day, 365 days a year. And when we think about education in that context, when we understand that education isn't just about math and science, reading, or technology, but about the development of the whole child, well-rounded, resilient children, and when we understand that is what education is about, then we as mayors have tremendous resources at our disposal. We have our park systems and our libraries. We have all the folks that interact with children on a daily basis, including our police officers. And when we bring those resources to bear, we can affect outcomes for our children. Paul Tough, in his book, How Children Succeed, talks about the social emotional factors that kids need to be successful beyond just academic proficiency. Kids need grit and zest and self-determination, gratitude, optimism, and curiosity if they're truly going to be successful. KIPP Academies really understand this. KIPP Academies have been one of the most successful charter schools in the country in getting kids to perform at a very high level, graduate from high school, and get into college. But one of the things that happened at the KIPP Academies was that even though they were getting their kids into college, after 6 years, only 13% of those kids had actually graduated from college, and most of them had dropped out. So we needed to start thinking about character and things outside of academic proficiency and how we ingrain things like all of these characteristics that you see on the screen. We needed to start rewarding effort and not just intelligence. A lot of this was based on Carol Dweck's work, who talks about the two different mindsets that kids can have. A fixed mindset, where they don't believe that they are capable of learning anything more than they already were kind of innately born with. And a growth mindset, where kids believe that they can actually get smarter if they work harder. And so by rewarding effort instead of just innate intelligence, we can help those kids understand what they can accomplish. Kids that have a fixed mindset don't ask questions in the classroom because they're afraid that they'll look stupid. Only 13% of kids with fixed mindset even ask for additional help from their teachers or from others, and it severely limits their ability to learn. But we can change a child's mindset from a fixed one to a growth mindset. You don't do it just by saying, hey, get a growth mindset. You do it by showing them examples of people that have succeeded in spite of obstacles that they have faced in their life. A couple of weeks ago, President Obama announced My Brother's Keeper initiative at the White House. And the kids that stood behind him were kids from Chicago, who the president had spent time listening to and hearing their stories. But more important than the president hearing their stories was these children hearing the president's story. And he told them that he had been much like them, the child of a single mother, hadn't always been the most attentive student. I think he actually admitted to smoking marijuana in the White House, not in the White House. He was in the White House when he admitted that perhaps he had smoked some illegal substances. And these kids all of a sudden understood that someone like the president wasn't all that different than they were, and that they could possibly overcome and get through the challenges that they faced. They understood that they could beat the odds. One of the dinners that I always try to get to whenever I can is a dinner sponsored by the Children's Defense Fund called Beat the Odds. Every year, 4 children from Minneapolis and St. Paul are recognized for graduating from high school, but overcoming obstacles that would crush most of us. One of the stories that I will never forget is a story of Fadumo Hassan. Fadumo had grown up in the war-torn streets of Somalia, raised by her mother along with her brothers and sisters. But at the age of 8, Fadumo's mother died. Her father, who had been absent, came back into the picture and brought Fadumo and her brothers and sisters to Minneapolis. After getting there, the father abandoned the children once again, and they were left in the care of a caring aunt. The caring aunt was like a second mother to Fadumo and provided a safe environment for her. But on August 1st, 2007, the aunt was killed in the collapse of the 35W bridge. But Fadumo had a growth mindset. She believed that she could succeed, and so she did. She didn't let the obstacles that she had seen and she had faced in her life deter her from succeeding. She got busy, enrolled in after-school programs, started working to help support her other brothers and sisters, and ultimately, when I met her, she was not only graduating from high school, preparing to go to college, but she wanted to grow up to be a dentist. In the city of St. Paul, we're dramatically changing how we approach our work with our youth. We have to have people that interact with youth that believe in their potential and believe in their possibilities and understand the connection between social and emotional maturity and learning and how that affects what happens in the classroom. If you have people that are interacting with our children that don't believe in them, they'll pick that up right away. And so we worked very hard to bring in youth workers that understood what it was like to be in the same position that many of our kids find themselves in. As we're about to open a new recreation center, a community center that has both a recreation center and a library in it, we're making sure that our youth workers understand really what it takes to reach out to kids and help them develop social and emotional skills that they'll need to succeed. One of the things that we're doing in the center is making sure that their work is steeped in racial equity. So even though the center won't open up for another month, the 60 people that will be working in that center have already spent 2 days in training working on a deep dive on racial equity. We're bringing in street workers who have worked with our kids, that work with kids on the street, and bringing them into the libraries. Not to work with the kids in the libraries, but to work with the mostly white and female librarians so that they understand how to react and interact with our kids of color, particularly our young African American males. We have a whole set of things that we're working on in the city of St. Paul. Sprockets is our out-of-school and summer school learning network, where we're making sure that the programs that are working with kids understand this interaction between learning in the classroom and learning social emotional skills in order to be able to succeed. A successful after-school or summer program for children doesn't just focus in on academics, it focuses in on the whole child. We also have a program called Generation Next, which is Minneapolis and St. Paul's version of Strive. And they're working on all of the pieces that are important, like pre-K readiness, reading and writing, working on college readiness. But one of the things that I have fought very, very hard is to make sure that the Generation Next effort incorporates a bandwidth for social and emotional learning. Because the evidence of the importance of this is so clear, there is no way that we can do things on education unless we're also talking about social and emotional learning. Even in our Youth Summer Jobs program, even though it is about getting kids a job in the summer, it's also about social emotional learning. And we're helping the employers that are bringing these kids in to understand how they can assess the growth in social emotional skills that our kids are so in such desperate need of. On the other end of social emotional skill sets are the serious, significant problems that many of our kids are facing. In the St. Paul public school system, there's an estimate that 10% of the children have significant undiagnosed mental illness. Imagine being a teacher in a classroom where 10% of your kids have an undiagnosed and significant mental illness, and ask how hard it is to be able to teach all the children in the classroom. I've chaired a roundtable specifically on the delivery of services for adults in terms of mental health care. And it's made a significant difference by bringing in all the providers and finding resources to deal with adults that are suffering from mental illness. But we need to do the same thing for kids, to bring in all the providers and then advocate to make sure that we have resources so that our children that are dealing with emotional illness are able to get the help that they need. People that face their demons do it in a lot of different ways. Some of you may know the story of Beck Weathers. It was recounted in John Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air. Beck was a success by most standards. He was a surgeon in Houston and climbed mountains for a passion. But it was the reason why Beck climbed those mountains that matters for our story here today. He was searching for something that wasn't on top of a mountain, but was lacking from within. The long story made short is that 3 times Beck was left to die on the mountain by his colleagues, and he was eventually rescued from 17,000 feet on a day when 8 people died on Mount Everest. A year or so after this event, someone asked Beck, would you like to go back to before, to the way you were before you climbed that mountain? And he said, yeah, I'd love to have my nose and my toes and my fingers back. I'd love to have my career back. But if the price of getting those things back was going back to the person that I was before that incident, I wouldn't take that deal. The cost would be too high. Our children face demons, and a lot of times they respond to it by turning to gangs or to drugs or other self-destructive acts. I don't recommend going to the extremes that Beck went to, but I do believe that children can find the strength from within paddling along a creek or hiking along a trail. A couple of years ago, I started a program sending kids out to Glacier National Park. Every summer, a couple of dozen kids go out to the park, mostly kids of color, mostly from the inner city, kids that hear gunshots outside their house on a regular basis, but for whom the greatest fear they can imagine is sleeping outside. Last year, I got to walk with a group of kids along this trail, the Highline Trail just off of Logan Pass. As we walked along, I was behind a young man who was literally shrinking with fear from every step that he took. When he got to the other side of this trail that you see here, he sat down on a rock and began to cry. I asked him how he was doing and how I could help. And he said, you know, I'm scared. I'm frightened by heights. but I'm also crying because I'm so happy to be here. A couple of hours later, as we returned over this exact same trail, he was skipping along that trail. He had to be reminded to hold on to the wire for his safety. In those couple of hours along a trail in Glacier National Park, his self-confidence had changed dramatically. He had achieved something that he never imagined that he could have achieved. He found an inner strength that he didn't know he had. Not every kid is going to have a glacier moment, but every child needs to have that opportunity to find from within their ability to succeed. And we as mayors and local elected officials have to make sure that we provide those opportunities for our children. As we build our libraries or our parks, as we train our police officers or others that interact with our children, let's make sure that they have the ability to provide a growth mindset for our children, that they understand the importance of social emotional skills, and we work towards helping our children achieve all that they are capable of achieving. When I was 17, I stepped off a cliff as a young man, but I climbed back up as a confident adult prepared to succeed in life. We have to give our children that same opportunity. We can't leave them dangling off a cliff with no one on belay. And when we do that, in everything that we do, we will truly be education mayors. Thank you.